Welcome, everybody, to the live stream. After some postponements, we are here. Two-thirds of the panel is here at the moment. I'm Random. I'm here with the Boxing Librarian, and we are going to be, it's not a countdown, we're just going to be talking about some underrated pre-1940 boxers. Firstly, BL, welcome, and how are you doing?
I'm doing about 70%, which is better than the 20 or 30% I was 3 or 4 days ago. But yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm getting there slowly.
Well, I'm glad you're on the mend, and it's been great to see you put out the content again. Especially you've been talking a lot of heavyweights on your channel, which I love that. I love that bracket. So,
yes, I have. Yeah, I've focused to get my heavyweight 18, 19, 19, 10 fighters done. I'm just going down the divisions now.
Yeah, wonderful. And I know it's got to be a bit of a headache figuring out where to put someone because guys move through divisions, and sometimes they're prominent in multiple divisions. So it's just one of those things. You know how it is. You got to make a call.
Yeah, like Nick Burley. Nick Burley fought at heavyweight, but he never weighed really anything between 155, 165 pounds. But yeah, He fought heavyweights, but he also fought middleweights. So yeah, it can be hard to place some fighters like Jack Twin Sullivan. I'm putting him in at light heavy, but he also fought at welter. He also fought at middle. You know, he's just it's crazy this time. Yeah,
Jack O'Brien. I mean, he had to claim one of the middleweight claimants, and then he won the light heavyweight title. But then he just sort of didn't really care. Because he wanted to go up to heavyweight.
Yeah, for the money. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like the way people still see, like maybe not now, but like maybe some years ago, the way they would have seen cruiserweight, where, you know, it's maybe later it feels more established, but at the time there are questions. Light heavy was literally light heavy, like welter. In fact, in some newspaper articles in later years after that, the newspapers talking about the need for light welter, the way and light middle. I think it was one of the two. The way that light heavy was, this was, you know, just a few years after that. So yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, you get more people going, or you want more belts because it's more money. We end up with a bit of an alphabet soup today, but, you know, as you know, we had white championship claims, we had multiple just world championship claims, and then the national claims, and then also the colored titles. So it wasn't as pristine as some might imagine if they just heard someone bashing the new school in exclusively. Like it's a muddle, you know this, it's a muddle everywhere. It's just fascinating it's probably less traumatic to just study than it was to live through for some of these boxers trying to get opportunity. So
yeah, most definitely.
So with your voice suffering, we decided to keep it to 3 folks. We're going to do 3 boxers each, and then when Scrap's able to join us, if he comes in on the show, bang, he's in. We're not sure, but we have tons of underrated fighters. So like we said, we're not doing a countdown here, so we're going to go ahead and do 3 each. That's the plan right now. BL's going to go first. I never like to go first. So who are you going to talk about first there?
Yeah, first of all, before I highlight my fighter, I'd just like to say I hope Scrappy's okay. It's not like him to be absent, so I hope he's all right. The fighter I'm going to talk about first is actually the Philly Phantom, Tommy Loughran. The reason why I think Tommy Loughran's underrated, and some people may say, no, he's not underrated, he's in Hall of Fame, he's, you know, this and that. But actually, it does still get very underrated to most people. You know, we're talking about a fighter who fought Hall of Famers into double digits. Okay, he beat nearly double digits Hall of Famers himself in beating 9 Hall of Famers. This guy fought over 40 rated fighters individually, beating 36 of them and having large fight runs against some of them, 3-4 fights sometimes. You know, he also fought and beat a whole number of champions as well. In fact, when we think about the champions for Tommy Loughran, he actually beat champions who titled, okay, at welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight. He beat fighters who titled from welterweight to heavyweight.
Incredible.
Now, another thing about Loughran, not only is he underrated because he won at master boxers of his time, a counter-puncher, an excellent boxing master. He was a real boxing master. Not much of a puncher. Loughran was not a big puncher at all. He relied on his boxing skills. But one of the things about him is how he did, not only at light heavyweight, fighting fight series with Harry Greb and fighting all these other fighters, fight series with Mike Mateague and many, many others. He also went up to heavyweight. Okay, he beat rated fighters. from middleweight to heavyweight. But when he'd done all his light heavyweight work, okay, to go up to heavyweight and beat fighters like Max Baer, Ernie Schaff, and Tuffy Griffiths, okay, other heavyweight contenders like King Levinsky, Steve Hamas, Alator, Ray Pelletier, you know, he fought many heavyweights and beat them after all the work he did at light heavyweight. And even when we think about the names Tommy Loughran fought, as well as fighting Primo Carnera with nearly £100 weight disadvantage, you know, people talk about Usyk giving away 40 pounds or something to Fury. Well, imagine fighting a guy who you're giving nearly £100 away to. Okay, and Tommy Loughran fought him. The Hall of Famers he beat, okay, are fighters whose great names. Okay, he beat Harry Greb, Hall of Famer. He beat Jeff Smith, great Hall of Famer. He beat Young Striblin. He beat Josh Carpentier. He beat Jimmy Slattery. He beat James J. Braddock. He beat former heavyweight champion Jack Sharkey. Beat former heavyweight champion Max Baer. You know, beat the former great welterweight and middleweight all-time great Mickey Walker. And when you add to that all the other fighters he fought and beat, from Mike McTeague, Johnny Wilson, to tough contenders like Ted Moore, Ad Stone, Martin Burke, George Manley, you know, he's just beaten an absolute huge list of top-level fighters, including other fighters who fought across the weights, like Pete Latto.
These guys in the early ratings. Sorry to cut you off, but I was just going to say, when I started to look through the first few years of annual rankings, yeah, man, some of these guys that aren't famous, like Sekura, like he fought a busy schedule himself and did well, even though he wasn't like super high ranked every year. Some of these guys, they're perennially rated or in the mix there. Incredible time this was. Okay, go ahead. I'll stop interrupting.
Yeah, and he even like having a fight run, one 4-fight series. He fought Mickey Walker, then he fought Ernie Chaff, who were a top 10 and top 3 heavyweight. He fought James J. Braddock and Jack Sharkey. He only lost one of those 4 fights. You know, at other times, like 1927 going into 1928, he fought Jimmy Slattery, a Hall of Famer, Leo Lonsky, a former top 3 rated contender, Joe Sakira, a light heavyweight and heavyweight contender, Pete Latzo, a former champion, Armand Emmanuel, who was a good contender, top 10 rated at the time, with then a second fight against Pete Latzo. That's just in one 6-fight run. Okay, 4 of those guys were top 10 rated at light heavyweight that year. Two of those fights were against a guy who held the ring championship in his career. So it's not only that Tommy Loughran is fighting so many big names, he also beat many big names as well. You know, beating the champions across 4 divisions, beating rated fighters across 3 divisions, fighting all those rated opponents. Nearly 40 rated opponents he beat individually, and considering he fought many of them more than once. And other champions he beat who were not Hall of Famers, you know, like Pete Latzo, like Johnny Wilson, like Mike McTeague. It's not only the Hall of Famers he beat, it's just the whole package. Tommy Loughran, to me, has one of the best resumes from his time, and can be matched almost against anybody bar those huge names, I think, like Greb, you know, Sam Langford, maybe Johnny Dundee, etc. But yeah, he's certainly very underrated, even though he's in the Hall of Fame. He doesn't quite get the stature that he deserves when you couple all of that with the fact he was one of the master boxers of his time.
Absolutely. And just his bad luck to exist in a time where when he gets his shot, it's an absolute mountain of a man. And he's not a particularly hard hitting light heavy. He was brilliant, but he wasn't like Archie Moore as a light heavy, another light heavy champ who wanted to climb the mountain, go up to the big boys. But but Loughran was brilliant. He had wonderful finesse. So maybe with a different champion in a different time, he would have actually climbed the absolute mountain and had that other division. But this was crazy. These guys fought, and the schedule was madness. Like this, there's a good argument that Loughran, his career involves like the richest time in boxing history for how many fights all the rated fighters were having every year, season to season, like fighting lots of guys fighting full seasons. It was pretty crazy. I mean, you know this. The teens, and then the next decade or two after that, it's just these guys go berserk. But they're following the model of some of those, I guess, those early era fighters who had all the experience, all those rounds in that made them so great, like Dixon and like Gans, like Langford, Jeanette, and Blackburn, and a lot of these great, even earlier than his era, who were putting in that work. And Loughran, man, last time I did a ranking, I think I actually had him at like number 15 all time. based on his resume and all the names on it. Just wonderful wins,
Yeah,
but
he
also like
deserves to
the
be.
strength of schedule overall.
He does deserve to be highly ranked, and he is one of the premier fighters of his era.
I think all told, he'll probably still be inside my top 20 when I finish considering all the people that deserve to at least be considered for that sort of thing. But he's inside 20 right now, and I think rightly so. I mean, just incredible fighter, not like a power hitter. So someone who wanted to weigh that heavily, some people just like the finishers. Maybe that's not his strong suit. But as far as like fighting at the highest level in a rich era against great competition, including our number 2 fighter of all time, Harry Greb. So, getting the best of him in any encounter is absolutely bizarre. It's just incredible. And not a fluke, because Lochran was brilliant. And gave some tough fights and ones that he didn't get the victory, but he gave some tough fights, gave a good account of himself. Just a really incredible, competitor. Yeah, quick shout out to the chat. What's up, Ross, Martin, Old School Boxing? That's everyone. I almost said StreamYard because they have their little comments at the top. What am I doing? Yeah, Lochran's a good call, BL, because, it's possible to be known but still be underrated. Like, people have heard of Ezra Charles, but you go through his actual resume, it's like, oh my goodness. That's another guy, Ezra Charles. It's just the big names, the powerful fighters, the experienced opponents. It's just this long ass list. It's crazy.
I'll just add one comment on that, the Ezra Charles thing. I recently I was going back and forth on Facebook because some people think Ezra Charles's resume can walk on water. I was trying to point out to them that yes, he has a great resume, but many other fighters have great resumes too. A point that wasn't going down well. But that's one thing. That's one thing what I've never liked about the fanboy aspect, which is why I don't go along with fanboys, because if you credit Ezra Charles for the great resume he has, why can't you give Lochran or Johnny Dundee or any of the others the same credit for their great resume? But then we should talk about that.
Kid Lewis, Ted Kid Lewis, some of these guys, it's just, and even among some of the guys who didn't have as much numerical success at the highest level, like a battling Levinsky type, just an enormous career, including an enormous amount of work. There are other fighters like that where they maybe don't have as many high-level wins compared to their total, all-time great opponents, but they fought as tough a schedule and just didn't have quite as much success, but still have some elite wins in there, some great wins. Then you get a guy like
Levinsky. Very few fighters have fought Leo Hook 5 times, Jack Dillon 10 times, Billy Misk 4 times, and Harry Greb 6 times, just as an example. So, certainly Levinsky is underrated as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think was it Misk? He kind of had Misk's number, right? Stylistically, am I remembering that correctly? Did he win all their encounters?
You're talking about battling Levinsky?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I was glancing earlier, but I decided not to do him today, so I stopped glancing. Went back to mine.
Yeah, I've got a career video coming on him in next year at some point, yeah. No, he did fight Billy Misk 4 times, but they won 2 apiece.
Oh, it was 2 apiece. Okay. Yeah, so it was just a part of the listing that...
it might have been Tommy Gibbons you were thinking of.
Oh, maybe it is. Maybe it is. But I know that while he was champ, because it's no decision, so sometimes, as you've noted many times, sometimes the title can only change hands on a stoppage, and otherwise there's no official rendering of decision, and then people bet on what the newspaper men say. That seems to be what I've noticed, studying Langford, that one of his fights, I can't remember who it was. I think it was one of his fights out in California where the crowd, the heavy bettors in the inner circle were trying to get the ref to just say who he thought got the best of it so they could settle the wagers. So maybe if they could get something out of the ref, they'd go by that. But if they couldn't, the newspapers. But yeah, people find a way to bet. I mean, and some of the no decision stuff, sometimes it was limiting rounds for safety or perceived safety reasons or political reasons. But then also, to try and stop people betting, which is impossible. You just can't do it. So that was a wonderful choice right there, BL. Do you have anything else you want to add about the Great Philly Phantom here?
No, not really, mate. I've kind of covered what I want to cover on him. I have to be careful I don't overdo my throat, or I'll suffer horribly for it.
Right on, right on. Okay, so let's see. Who am I going to go to first? Yeah, let's talk about George Gardner. The largest, I believe the oldest and the largest of the three Gardner brothers of Lowell, Massachusetts. Very well known in their day. All three were elite at different weights. The brothers of the Jimmy and Billy were at the lower weights. George Gardner had some tough, opponents himself. Sometimes like he fought Jack Johnson, he lost to Jack Johnson. And late career, he lost fireman Jim Flynn, I think, beat him in one of their fights. Al Kaufman beat him toward the end of the career. But when he was at his best, probably, would you say his signature win would be that first stoppage of Jack Root, who was undefeated when they fought? Because Root had beaten him on a DQ, and then Gardner stopped him. Oh, I think Scrap just might have come. Scrap is here. Hold on a second. Let me let this gentleman in. Can you still hear me, BL?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
All right, Scrapbook, welcome. Welcome to the chat.
How's it going, Random? BL, how you feel?
Slowly recouping, my friend. How about yourself?
I'm hanging in there one day at a time, and that's all I can ask for.
Yeah, me too at the minute.
Same. Every day is a gift. So Scrap, because BL's voice is tender still, we were going to just do three guys each. And you're catching us at the beginning. So he went ahead and did his first one. He did the Philly Phantom, Tommy Loughran. And I'm just touching on George Gardner, who's a very interesting fighter. So he was respected. He was good at stopping people. Let me pull up. I actually made a couple notes here. So he started boxing at age 20, retired at age 32. He's born in 1877, County Clare in Ireland, on St. Patrick's Day, apparently. But he was it looks like he was about 5'11 and a half. He had 68 fights. I think that's either according to Wiki or BoxRec, but he had approximately just under 70 fights. 45 wins, 11 losses, 9 draws, and some no contests, 31 knockouts. He's in 97 he just went 1-0. In 1898 he went 11-0. Only real notable win was a 7th round stoppage of C.C. Smith, colored heavyweight champion claimant, however you would say it. You guys would know better than me. 1899 Gardner, he's picking up steam now, so he has 8 fights. He goes 5-1-2. He stops Harry Fisher in the 17th round. And I think that might have been his first 20-round booking, if I'm not mistaken. Then he beats TKO's Jimmy Handler, who's a capable fighter, in the 18th round of scheduled 25 rounds, people. Went to the 18th. And then Jack Moffat, who had a good record, or Moffat, I'm not sure how exactly they would have been saying it, who retired in the 8th round of a scheduled 20. So that's 1899, 5 wins. 3 of those wins, he's pretty deep into the fight, so he's getting the real experience. In 1900, he goes 10 wins without a loss, one draw, and I believe 1 no contest. I think that might have been Bob Armstrong, maybe. But he stops Harry Fisher. He draws with George Byers, who won the middle and heavyweight colored world titles, but also later is even more notable for having been, you can probably say, the principal trainer for the great Sam Langford. And so they draw the first time they meet. Gardner then stops Jimmy Handler in 3 rounds this time for scheduled 25. Then he fights Byers again, and I think he wins on a DQ in the 14th. And they also have a no contest later, which if I would guess would be for inactivity. Some of these refs and the crowds were very intense about get the action on. That happened to Sam Langford too. Several fights were just stopped. The refs like, nope, and you're not getting paid either. So it does happen. But he has one of his fights in a long series he had with Kid Carter, who was a pretty tough character and popular fighter. Wins on DQ when they fight 1900. And then he wins on DQ over Frank Craig, the Harlem Coffee Cooler. That was his nickname, right?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Yeah, that's a cool one. So then he comes in. So like he's really like he's pretty badass. He had like little setbacks, some draws and things, but Gardner's doing it up, right? And his brothers are fighting too. I think he started before them, but certainly by like 1902, 1903, they're in the mix with some experience. Then 1901, he goes 4-1. He gets another stoppage of Jack Moffat. He stops Kid Carter. Then he loses on points to the great Barbados Joe Walcott, who was an elite lightweight who would fight above his weight often, who became the best welterweight in the world who would fight up above his weight. Still, even higher, had to open challenge to the heavyweights with backed by forfeit money via his manager. He was crazy. So he got it on. He gave up a lot of weight and still beat George Gardner, one of Walcott's best wins. Probably the stoppage of Joe Choyinski is an even better win, but certainly beating George Gardner, this George Gardner who's stopping all these dudes and holding his own against, middles, light heavies, and the smaller heavies. So anyway, so after that, after he loses to Walcott, he stops Kid Carter again. Then 1902, he loses to Jack Root, who was undefeated at the time. Great, really good fighter who's undefeated, with a lot of experience. Loses on a DQ in the 7th. Then he gets a revenge win over Barbados Walcott. Excellent win. Because Walcott could easily beat up a lot of guys heavier. He was avoided by people much larger than himself. So it's still a legit win because Walcott was a factor above his own weight. Then he fights Root again. This time he stops him in 17. Root's first career loss. But then Gardner loses to Jack Johnson, a less experienced, but still experienced Jack Johnson. But lasts the 20 rounds, loses on points. Then he wins like a short 6-round decision over Billy Stift, and then why not Kid Carter one more time on points over 6 rounds. So that brings him to 1903. He has a no contest with Bob Armstrong, former colored heavyweight champion. Although I think by the time they fought, Armstrong had lost it to Denver Ed Martin, who'd lost it to Jack Johnson, if I'm thinking. But anyway, Gardner stops Peter Marr in 1, the Irish Giant. He then stops Marvin Hart, who a couple years after this would actually win the vacant white heavyweight world championship, basically. But anyway, Hart retires in the 12th. Then he fights Jack Root again, stops him again, this time TKO in the 12th round of 20. At the end of the year, he loses to old man Fitzsimmons. He loses to Ruby Rob. Ruby Rob playing games, like put some rumors out there that he wasn't in good shape and he was drinking, and they were speculating it was a ruse. And then the odds came more favorably, and I'm sure Fitz made a nice little tidy pile betting on himself to win. Having brought the line down by putting out these rumors, because he handled himself pretty well. It wasn't a fantastic fight, but it went 20 rounds. Fitz got the decision. I saw someone write online, it might have been on the some bio, that it was like a controversial decision, but I've not seen anything that it was controversial at all. I thought every report I saw that fight, Fitz did the business. It wasn't an excellent fight throughout the whole fight, but Fitz was the man in that night out in California. So anyway, 1904, Gardner draws with Marvin Hart. Nice little rivalry. Why not? Just one more win over Kid Carter. Then he draws with Jack Root over 6, and then he loses to Jack Root over 6. And then he draws with Fireman Jim Flynn. 1904 edition, Fireman Jim Flynn. Starting to get a little bit past it. He gets TKO'd by Mike Schreck in the 20th round, I think, of the schedule 20. Mike Schreck, on our first installment, I actually featured him as one of my underrated fighters. So he loses to Schreck. The end is near. He loses between 1905 and 1910. He loses to Schreck among these fights. Loses to Al Kaufman, one of the White Hopes, in 14. Gets stopped by Fireman Jim Flynn, and then stopped by the Italian Bearcat, Tony Ross, in the 7th. And Flynn, I think, got him in the 18th. So that's pretty much all of Gardner's fights. And there's their photos of the prominent opponents right there. I won't try to list them and give MapQuest directions to try and figure out who's who in there, but they're all in there. All the guys I just mentioned are up there. Now, I did find it was interesting because he fought 2 of the greatest colored fighters of Well, of all time, Barbados Walcott, Jack Johnson, no problem. He fought him. I did find an instance of him and George Byers and Bob Armstrong, but I did find an instance of him drawing the color line, and it was when I believe they were called the Lincoln, or they might be the Douglas at that point, but I think it was the Lincoln Athletic Club in Chelsea, Massachusetts, in Slugtown, which is just north of the city of Boston. It's on the other side of the Mystic River. It's like attached practically. Well, actually today, but yeah, they offered him, but then Gardner wouldn't do it. But then the newspaper, you can see there, if you just, I'll leave it up for a moment. They were basically saying, well, he's fought colored fighters, so it's not about Langford's color. He just thinks the guy's too much. But if we think about just who George Gardner was willing to fight, it's a big list of dangerous people. Peter Mayer, or Marr, I keep saying his name wrong, Marvin Hart, Jack Root, Fitz. He's fighting some dudes, right? But he didn't want any of Sam Langford, so just one more instance of Sam it was just tough for clubs had the money there. He had the skills and the ability to keep a schedule, but he had a lot of bad luck as far as fighters thinking twice and some cancellations and things throughout his career. Sad times for Sam Langford. However, mentioning Gardner, I'm assuming he made pretty decent money in his career. He certainly had quite a few big fights, even those late career fights. He was a name. He was considered one of the better heavyweights after his light heavyweight reign. I see him written off by some people, at least, as one of the better heavyweights. So in America at the time. So yeah, that's George Gardner. I think he goes underrated because no one knows at all who he is. Even here in Boston, I'm in Boston. Lowell is not that far from here. No one knows who George Gardner is. And so in this setting on this channel where we don't care about, it's not about popularity unless we do a show on popularity specifically. It's just about credit. So he deserves a lot of credit. He did avoid Sam Langford, as did many, but look at the list of the people he did fight. I mean, he got his groove on. So respect to George Gardner. And I think that's about all I got to say on him for this show. It's Scrapbook. It's such a pleasure to have you here, my friend. And you can add if you want, or you can just fire away with one of your underrated fighters.
Can I just, before Scrapbook jumps in, can I just add 2 quick points I want to add on George Gardner?
Oh, please.
Sorry, Scrap. I know you're wanting to get kicked in. First of all, I'd just like to say that George Gardner was tougher than his resume suggests, because we're talking about a guy who did fight the 20-round distance with Barbados Joe Walcott and Bob Fitzsimmons and Jack Johnson. And most at stoppage losses of George Gardner are actually in his last 15 fights. His form degraded. The first 2 fights he had with Jack Root, he lost one and then won one. The later 2 fights, he actually didn't win either of them. And you see that through his career. Some fighters, he gets lessening results against them. When he lost to Mike Schreck and, fireman Jim Flynn by late stoppage in 2018. Actually, in his prime, when he was at his best, he was actually a really tough fighter who could go the distance with Walcott and Fitzsimmons, which was not an easy thing to do. So that's just one quick point I want to fire out. About the colour line, maybe it'd have been handy if Mike Schreck drew colour line with Langford, because Langford were in ferocious form and came out and just battered him and destroyed him in round 1 with apparently a very brutal display of just coming out and power punching with both hands until you knock the guy out. But to be fair to George Gardner as well, he did fight a whole number of black fighters like Frank Craig and Byers, C.C. Smith and others who didn't get many opportunities themselves. He also had a really good fight run in 1903 where he knocked out Peter Maher, stopped Marvin Hart and Jack Root on the trot, which is no easy thing. So, yeah, just a very good fight. I just want to add them quick points. I won't add any more because my throat goes. So my apologies to Scrapbook. I'll let him jump in.
Yeah, I just must add one more thing. Yeah, just to be clear to everyone, I've said this before here on the channel. For guys that did either sometimes or always draw the color line, like, it's really about there's no rule about what you are supposed to look like. It's because it's a sport. It's just about competition prowess. So it's possible for someone to be great without fighting literally everybody. Even if there are other great fighters, there's certain matchups they just didn't want to know. So that's what I found with Gardner, but I don't bring it up to bash him or anything like that, because Gardner fought a really tough career. If knowing who all those people are, or most of those people are, that I finally at the point where I know where most of those guys are, that's a tough run. So he definitely deserves respect. And I appreciate the add-on, BL.
No problem.
All right, Scrapbook, you're up, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me. BL, no problem at all. Random, you chose George Gardner. George Gardner is a fascinating fighter, believe it or not. All of these young men were middleweights at that time, and then he moved up to the light heavyweight division when it became available in 1903. And it was designed for Jack Root. But George Gardner in 1902, he had a fascinating year. He was in the ring with, as you spoke about before, Joe Walcott, the Barbados Demon, who was the first black welterweight champion in boxing history. That was very significant. He was in the ring with Jack Johnson that year. And he was in the ring with Jack Root twice that year. All these men were champions, not at the time, but they became champions. So that was a fascinating year by George Gardner. And George Gardner, as we know, he would defeat Jack Root, and he would become the second, well, really the second light heavyweight champion in boxing history, because Jack Root was somewhat first, because the way it went, you know, he was given the title, but then he had to fight another person in order to solidify it. So in comes, you know, fighters such as McCoy, and then you also had I forget the other fighter's name, but these men had to fight one another, and they solidified who would be the champion, and it turned out to be George Gardner when he defeated Jack Root. So that was a very, very good year for him in 1902, but he was a very good fighter. Like I said, they were all middleweights at that time. And for you to select him, I think that was very good thinking, because he is an underrated fighter, as BL had magnificently expressed. So very good choice in George Gardner. I wanted to choose Panama Joe Gans. Panama Joe Gans, Cyril Quinn Jr. He was managed by Leo P. Flynn, who also managed Kid Norfolk. Panama Joe Gans was a fascinating fighter. He was. He had over 134 bouts. And he would win the Panamanian Light Heavyweight Championship. No, the Panamanian Lightweight Championship, excuse me, October 10th of 1915, if I'm correct. He was a fighter, didn't speak much English, but he was a fighter who had very good technical skills, even as a young man. And you don't hear much about his technical skills. You hear about his record, you hear about him as a person, but he was very technical in his skills. And that's what made him very dangerous as a fighter, because he was one of the first guys to feint and turn southpaw and orthodox in the middle of a fight. So when you look at fighters such as Panama Joe Gans, and of course, Nobby Joe Gans, and Kid Norfolk, all of these fighters had similar skills and similar styles. But Panama Joe Gans, he was in a ring with so many great fighters during his time. And I don't think he's given as much credit as he really should get. I mean, you're looking at fighters. I mean, he lost his title to Larry Estridge, and I'm going to talk about him in a moment, because I met Larry Estridge. He lived in the Bronx, New York. I think I met him in '82. And he told me a lot of stories about those days. And he told me about Panama Joe Gans, how technical he was as a fighter. But Panama Joe Gans, he would win his first title when Jack Johnson would lose his his heavyweight championship title in 1915 to Jess Willard. And that meant a lot, because although it was not a world title, but he would win a title of some sort. And it turned out to be the Panamanian Lightweight Championship title. And that was October 10th, 1915. So Panama Joe Gans, when you look at his resume, I mean, it's amazing. BL, is Panama Joe Gans in the Hall of Fame? I'm just curious.
No, he's not, Scrap, actually.
I didn't think he was. And it's sad when you have fighters who deservingly should be in the Hall of Fame, and they're not. And he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame as far as I'm concerned. 1917, he would bring the Panamanian championship title to Harlem. And after meeting Leo P. Flynn, I mean, here's a man who, like I said, had so many technical skills that he and Kid Norfolk was brought to spar Bill Brennan in 1919. Because in 1920, Bill Brennan and Jack Dempsey was going to open up the Garden as the first heavyweight bout under the Walker Law. And they wanted Jack Dempsey to get some work. So Jack Dempsey didn't want to spar with these guys, so they decided to spar with Bill Brennan. And Panama Joe Gans got in the ring first. And he basically made a mockery of Bill Brennan. Kid Norfolk got in the ring second. And they had to stop the sparring session because Kid Norfolk was touching up Bill Brennan too much. So these two men alone in their time, they had the same manager, Leo P. Flynn, really was developing the way the system would run with black fighters not getting the opportunities during that time. And these men used to hang out, and I talked about this before. And when I talk about these men, I'm talking about Kid Norfolk and Panama Joe Gans. Even Larry Estridge, who I'm going to talk about in a moment. They used to hang out at the Supper Club. Now, that was on 142nd Street in Harlem, New York. You know who had the Supper Club? Jack Johnson. Club Deluxe was on the first floor, and the Supper Club was on the second floor. And Jack Johnson would lose that club to a gangster who came from Sing Sing. His name was Malling. And he strong-armed the establishment and ran Jack Johnson out of Harlem into Chicago. And Jack Johnson would wind up getting a club there, and then he would lose that club. And, you know, everywhere he went, the mob was always on his back. They wanted money from him. He would pay him off and couldn't pay him anymore, so he would have to leave that city. But Panama Joe Gans was just an upright fighter. He moved from left to right. He would switch from southpaw to orthodox. And he fought a lot of men who were much heavier than he was. But like I said, they used to hang out in the Supper Club. And it would be him and Theodore Tiger Flowers, Joe Gans, the Barbados Demon. You had Theodore Tiger Flowers, Harry Wills a little later on. I mean, they all hung out at the Supper Club. And everyone would admit that Panama Joe Gans was one of the best of that batch. So I just wanted to mention Panama Joe Gans. I believe he was such a great fighter, and unfortunately, he is not in the Hall of Fame as the BL had alluded to, but I think he was a very, very good fighter, and he deserves some form of recognition. He would wind up winning the Panamanian middleweight championship title. He would win the colored middleweight championship title, and he would lose it, like I said, to Larry Estridge. But he was a very hard puncher. He moved from side to side. He would throw feints, and he was good with his feet. Very, very good fighter was Panama Joe Gans.
Yeah, good shout out for him, Scrap. Very good fighter.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we do here. We're here to shout out the old school. I mean, we've talked about more modern fighters when we do some of our countdowns that cover that time period. But yeah, these old school guys, they went through it, and a lot of them just didn't get their full credit. Sometimes they got it in their day and not later, but some guys just didn't even get it during their day. Just didn't get the opportunity, I should say. They might have been recognized for the skills, but it's a tough road. It's a tough road. If
I may just do a shameless plug, well, not exactly shameless, but a shameless plug, random. All these fighters like Panama Joe Gans and all these fighters will be covered in career videos on the next period on my career video series I'm doing. So to anyone who subscribes to my channel, you will see career videos on Panama Joe Gans and all these fighters.
Yeah, and absolutely, people, if you're not already, go subscribe to Boxing Librarian. Go get, and also while you're at it, go to Scrapbook Boxing. Hit the subscribe button.
Thank you.
So let's see. So I think, BL, I think we've reached your second fighter of the night. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm just going to drink some water. My throat's drying.
Yeah, go right ahead.
My second fighter, okay, is going down in weight from Tommy Loughran. and it is a fighter called Memphis Palmore. Now, some people may not have heard of Memphis Palmore. They may not be aware he had over 170 wins. They may not be aware he had over 250 career fights. They may not be aware he had over 30 fights against champions and nearly 30 fights against Hall of Famers. What you're looking at in Memphis Palmore is a fighter who fought the 10-round distance over 100 times. Okay, he fought the 12-round distance 39 times. A very, very experienced fighter. Now, to give you an idea of what this guy's resume is like, in one period, okay, in 1922, okay, into 1923, okay, he fought this list of opponents in just 2 years. Okay, he fought Carl Tremaine, okay, who was a very good contender. He fought Cowboy Eddie Anderson twice. He fought Charles Bud Taylor, Sammy Mandel, former Super Bantam champ Jack Kid Wolf, great bantamweight Joe Lynch, contender Harold Smith, 2 more fights with Charles Bud Taylor, another fight with Charles Bud Taylor, great Olympic gold medalist flyweight, former world champion Frankie Gennaro. Okay, he fought Joe Lynch, Johnny McCoy. That is just in 1 2-year period, and that is not counting all his fights. He had other fights around that. In fact, when you look at Memphis Palmore, he also, okay, fought many of these great fighters multiple times. Okay, he fought a 10-fight series, okay, with one of the greatest bantamweight fighters of all time in Joe Lynch. Okay, he actually won that series slightly, 4-win, 3-loss, 3-draw. He also had a 5-fight series, okay, gaining more wins against great top 10 bantamweight fighter of all time, Charles Bud Taylor. He also beat 2 other great bantamweight fighters, Pete Kid Herman, okay, who did not beat Memphis Palmore in 2 attempts, and also Kid Williams, who's another very underrated fighter down at those lower weights. Yes, later in his career, he also fought fighters like Peter Cerrone, Jimmy McLarnin, and a whole host of others. But to me, Memphis Palmore, in beating the 5 Hall of Famers he beat, in fighting all of the champions he fought, in the incredible tough fight runs he had. I would love to go deeper, but I can't talk too much. But basically, he fought or beat many of the greatest bantamweight champions of that era and some of the greatest bantamweight fighters of all time. He also fought a whole number of the great flyweight fighters of his time, you know, like I mentioned, Frankie Gennaro, etc., etc., etc. And he also fought even great featherweights of his time. So you're talking about a fighter who fought fighters who covered multiple weights, you know, in large fight series often, and has more than his fair share of good wins in there as well. He actually has a winning record against champions, which when you factor who he fought as champions, is actually quite incredible. And he's kind of got a drawn record against Hall of Famers. But just to highlight that again, okay, I think one of the best points to highlight Memphis Palmore is actually to think about the champions he fought, considering he has a winning record against them. These are just the individual champions he fought. He fought Kid Williams, Pete Kid Herman, Jack Kid Wolf, Joe Lynch, Jimmy Wilde, Eugene Creaky, Johnny Buff, who was a good puncher, Sammy Mandel, Charles Bud Taylor, Frankie Gennaro, McLarnin, Fidel LaBarba, and Peter Cerrone. Now, when you fight that list of champions, many of them in the Hall of Fame, some of them should be in the Hall of Fame, and you have a winning record against them, overall, it shows you are a great fighter. Plus, he beat 5 Hall of Famers individually, and he has such an active career, fighting many, many, many times per year. I'll actually have to cover him on my Facebook page, actually, and go through his year by year like I'm doing at the moment currently on Freddie Miller. But yeah, Memphis Palmore's my number 2 underrated fighter.
Very nice. Scrap, you want to add to that?
Memphis Palmore was a phenomenal fighter. BL, great choice. He was a really, really good fighter. I wish a lot of these young men would get more recognition other than the fact that BL is bringing all these men alive, and, you know, the families, members of them, if they could hear what BL talks about in regards to their family members, they would be very proud. But yeah, Memphis Palmore was a very, very good fighter. He's unrecognized in a lot of eyes of boxing fans, and I'm glad BL is bringing him up. But I think BL has said it all. I mean, you're talking about a man who was in a ring with just about everybody. He just didn't get the I can't say opportunities, but he was not put on a plateau for that kind of recognition as he should. But yeah, phenomenal fighter was Memphis Palmore. Very, very good fighter.
Yeah, thank you, Scrap. I think he's very underrated, a worthy Hall of Famer, but definitely underrated.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Great shout out. Okay,
May I
so
say it's very strange because I'm having to hold back a bit, but I hope I'm being fairly concise for you guys and for listeners, even though I am having to hold back a little bit and not talk quite as much as I'd like to.
I think you're
yeah,
doing a
you're doing
phenomenal
great.
job, and we all understand exactly. I'm somewhat in the same situation as you. I hope you can understand me. I have somewhat of a throat issue as well. So, but you're doing a great job. Phenomenal job, yeah.
Well, I hope you're okay, Scrap, and thank you. It means a lot.
Yeah, this is great. I'm so happy that we got to do this. And this next guy, okay, so I'm gonna do Larry Temple, who had several nicknames. He was a good fighter. He had a influential manager, Tom O'Rourke, who managed his affairs for a lot of his career, especially like early in his career, which who had a falling out with the great Barbados Walcott. So Temple was supposed to be the next coming attraction at welterweight. He was supposed to be the guy to take over. He did actually get a win over Walcott, but it was 1908 edition Barbados Walcott, who was not just past his best, but he couldn't make fully close his hand on one side because he had shot himself in 1904. When he came back in 06, he wasn't quite the same. He didn't exclusively lose, but he wasn't the same. So beating him in 08 is still good, but it's not the same. But Temple actually gave Walcott a very close, very extremely exciting, action-packed title challenge. And I'm trying to remember what year they actually fought. Hold on, I probably have it on a graphic. There we go. There's his run. I found a few fights. I think three of those ones early on. They're ones that I found. I had a draw that I found of Temple's that wasn't on BoxRec or Cyber, but I can't find the clipping. It's buried in my archive, my little computer archive. So, but that's the run he made. The win over Eddie Kennedy, that really set some people's hair on fire. And I think that might have been the win where people were like, oh, holy cow. But so Temple had been, my understanding is from when I was doing some digging. So he was like, he cornered at certain times. He cornered Walcott, Barbados Walcott, and also George Dixon, and he was their training partner, at least at a time. They were all under Tom O'Rourke's guidance at a time. And then when Walcott left, Temple was supposed to be the next big thing. He had some really good wins. I think. Would you guys agree that Temple's best, from what you're understanding, Temple's best career win is a convincing win over 1905 Sam Langford in their series? I would say that that's easily the best win of his career. 1905 Langford, I can't remember exactly how many fights he had that year, maybe 14 or 15, but the only other guy to beat him was the great Joe Jeanette, who had like 20 pounds on him. And Temple, when he beat him, they were about the same size. So it was even. Langford was very experienced indeed. But Temple was a serious guy, right? But he had sort of up and down success. This early bit looks pretty clean, but let me just read. Not everyone will recognize all of the names, but you'll recognize some. I'm not going to read the results because he had wins, losses, and draws, but just listen to this list of names in 1900 and 1920. Okay, Eddie Kennedy, we said he's good. Billy Stift, Mike Donovan, Billy Stift again. Young Peter Jackson, Black Bill, Barbados Walcott, George Cole, Dixie Kid, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, Dixie Kid, Black Bill, Young Peter Jackson, Sam Langford, Jack Blackburn, Sam Langford, Jack Blackburn, George Gunther, George Cole, Sam Langford, George Gunther, Sam Langford, Jim Barry, Sam Langford, Harry Lewis, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, Barbados Joe Walcott, the Italian Bearcat Tony Ross, the Joplin Ghost Jeff Clark, times 4 Kid Norfolk, an earlier career Kid Norfolk. That's a hell of a strength of competition right there. That's some serious stuff. And I'm sure he has other fights that are not on these websites because I didn't spend that many clippings to find 4 fights that weren't in the database yet. So, and like I said, he's training with 2 of the greatest fighters of all time, and especially 2 of the acknowledged greats of the early decades of gloved boxing. George Dixon, Barbados, welcome. Serious stuff. Serious stuff. Temple goes very underrated. Very aggressive fighter. The up and down thing is because styles make fights, especially when someone has a real specialty. And if aggression and a certain style is his specialty, it can catch people off guard. He got Langford in one of their fights. But yeah, he's a serious guy. So I wanted to give him a shout out. I'm gonna probably do a video on him. I'm still doing the research. But there's his face. Let's see. And one thing I like, early in his career, they're calling him the Black Whirlwind. But later, the great Stanley Catchell will be the Michigan Whirlwind. So the names get recycled, and sometimes the more famous guy, that's not one of Catchell's most known nicknames, but the Michigan Assassin, I think, is his most famous. But the Michigan Lion, which I really like, and the Michigan Whirlwind. But Larry Temple was rocking it back in the early 1900s. Catchell came in later, and then the nickname applied. So, and interestingly, I feel like it's Larry Temple that fought young Jack Blackburn and young Jack Johnson late in his career. So sometimes it's interesting when guys really have only just retired, or sometimes they're still fighting and there's a young this and a kid that. Is like a name tribute. I love the nickname texture. You hear a nickname, be like, oh, like the problem child, the guy I'm not going to mention, but the YouTuber turned boxer. He's doing his thing. Well, he's not the first problem child. That's Big Sandy Ferguson, the slugger from Slugtown, the problem child. Sandy Ferguson, that was his nickname. Big Sandy was like almost Jess Willard sized, at least as far as one writer that did a thing about him. They said he was mismanaged. It was at a time he just transitioned to a new manager. They were saying he's like of those proportions, and hits plenty hard, But Big Sandy, yeah, he was a tough guy. He had a couple of really good wins. Gave a good account of himself in some fights, not all of them. But anyway, yeah. So those like I was saying, those nicknames recycle. So when I hear one now, like I hear them called Problem Child, I'm just thinking of Big Sandy, John Ferguson out of Chelsea, Mass.
If there's one quick comment I could just add about Larry Temple, because some people have cited to me in past that his win-loss ratio is not that great. But what you have to understand is A, his level of opposition, and B, the credit you have to give Larry Temple is he was a real fighter. He wasn't a poised boxer who box and move and try and outbox you. He was a real fighter. He'd come to fight. From the first spell, he'd come at you, he'd swing punches, he'd trade with you, he'd try and push you back. He was a real fighter. And when you're fighting like that and fighting murderous punches like Sam Langford and Barbados Walcott, you are going to pick up defeats. But he deserves a lot of credit for the type of fighter he was. A real fighting man.
For real. Hey, is Harry Lewis in the Hall of Fame?
Yes, he is, yeah.
Okay, so it looks like Temple had 13 fights against Hall of Famers, including a series. 5 fights he had with Sam Langford, the great Sam Langford. So 5 fights against, just like guys like Tommy Loughran. We mentioned battling Levinsky earlier. At the start of the show, some of these guys, they don't just fight an all-time great. They fight a series, a good 3 to 5 fights against this stuff. Some guys really get crazy with it, although they're not guaranteed success. Not everyone gets, you win some, you lose some is like a cute saying, but it's not real. I present as a common opponent with Temple. There's the Sam Langford versus Jim Barry series. Barry was like, I guess, a protege of sorts of John L. Sullivan. He was a Montana cowboy, tough character. And I think he was actually killed he was shot to death in Panama, maybe the day after he fought Sam McVeigh, I feel like. So he died young, but he was already past his prime. But anyway, that was the series he had with Langford. It didn't go well, especially that last one, the 1913 fight. He was heavily criticized for that loss. He said his arm got hurt, but he got out of there so quick that there was a big controversy in Australia about that fight. But anyway, so I didn't actually have Jim Barry. I don't know that he's rated at all by anyone to be underrated. Let me pull up this graphic of Larry Temple. Here we go. There's a drawing on the right there. Those are from the newspaper at the time. Pretty good likeness on the left, But he's Yeah, so Larry Temple, the Whirlwind, and I'm trying to remember, I can't remember his other nicknames right now. I can't bring them to mind, but he had a couple others. So anyway, that's what I wanted to give my second shout out to Scrapbook. You're welcome to add, but also you can take away your number two if you like, sir.
First of all, great breakdown, random, and those are wonderful illustrations of Larry Temple. Larry Temple was a very, very good fighter. I mean, look, when you start talking about Sam Langford and Jim Barry and Walcott, as well as Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, George Gunther, you're in there with good fighters, historical fighters for your time. So you have to give Larry Temple all the credit that he deserves. And that was a very good breakdown. Phenomenal job he did, Randall.
Oh, thank you, Scrap.
Now, I mentioned before I was going to bring in Larry Estridge. Larry Estridge was known as the Black Stanley Ketchel. That's what they called him. He was a southpaw, ball head, reminded a lot of people of Marvin Hagler. He was from St. Kitts, British West Indies. He was born June 17th, 1902. He would die September of 1987 in the Bronx. I met Larry Temple. I actually spent a lot of time with him on multiple occasions in the Bronx. And like I said, he sat down and spoke to me several times. He used to play Bidwits card game. And he pretty much understood that game. He was he was a brain when it came to boxing. He could break down things to you better than most. And it was always a pleasure of speaking with Larry Estridge. But Larry Estridge would become the last colored middleweight champion when Theodore Tiger Flowers would win the title. Now, once Theodore Tiger Flowers had lost the title to Mickey Walker, which was very controversial. It was in Chicago, and Al Capone had his hands all over that match. He did business with Mickey Walker's manager, Jack Kearns. But he was the last colored middleweight champion. And then you would bring in Jack McVeigh, and then, of course, the Harlem Thunderbolt, Harry Smith. But Larry Estridge told me about all of those names that I mentioned to you, Panama Joe Gans and Harry Smith and Jack McVeigh. It was so many of them. And he explained his style to me as well. He used to parry punches and he would move around. But he began his professional debut September 15th in 1922. And he would score a first-round knockout. Now, we talked about 1922 briefly, but we will eventually get into that year when we talk about the greatest years. But that year was phenomenal. It was phenomenal, and it changed so much of the way the game is even currently, because so many rules had changed, and it gave other opportunities to fighters who didn't get opportunities. That year was phenomenal. But Larry Estridge would face Kid Jackson, Jimmy Brown, and P.D. Coleman. These are names that most would not think about. They probably never heard of these names, but they were very good fighters during their day. He would lose to Augie Ratner. BL knows Augie Ratner. I heard him talk about him several times. He lost to him March 1st, 1924. He faced Allentown Joe Gans, Ted Moore, Henry Shaw, Jack Perry, and Rocky Smith. He became the world colored middleweight champion when he would defeat Panama Joe Gans, June 26, 1924, in New York's Yankee Stadium. And that was in his hometown. And he told me that really devastated him because he loved being champion. He was never given, and him as well as his peers, they were never given an opportunity to win a world title. So when they won the colored middleweight championship title, it meant a lot to him. But like I said, he never lost. The thing is, he never actually lost that title in the ring. It was taken from him when Theodore Tiger Flowers would become the first black middleweight champion of the world. And he was really, I wouldn't say he was sore about it, but he didn't like the fact that Flowers got that opportunity, and he felt that he deserved that because Panama Joe Gans had knocked out Theodore Tiger Flowers, and he himself had defeated Panama Joe Gans. It was one of those kind of things, but he was a very good fighter. He fought Frank Moody and Paul Berlenbach and others, but he was a very, very good fighter. It was Larry Estridge, and I wanted to bring his name in there. Very underrated fighter was Larry Estridge. He was the last colored middleweight champion before Jack McVeigh would eventually pick up that title. Great fighter.
Well, that's heavy duty. And I was looking online and it was hard to find. I didn't go into the newspaper archives, digital archives, but just Google search and some search engines. It was hard to find some pictures of him. I got 2.
Yeah, those are nice. Nice job, man. Nice job. Those are good pictures of.
You like the color scheme? So I was going to take red, although mine not. I think I did have a couple red, and then BL's got the green, and you get the orange like your Hank Armstrong, your Hammering Hank thumbnail.
Oh, this is wonderful. I like this. This is awesome. This is awesome.
It's such a pleasure to have you and BL here. Like I'm having the time of my life.
Thank you.
Yeah, Antonio, he does have some long old arms.
BL, what do you think of Larry Estridge, man?
Yeah. Yeah, he's yeah, he was a very good fighter. He was more of a thinking fighter than people give him credit for. He was a lot of the time, from what I've read of his fights, he was a bit more like a patient assassin, not aggressive like Larry Temple. He was more of a boxer who'd look, to see what you were doing and pick you off and find your weaknesses.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very, very good fighter, very cerebral fighter, from everything I've read about him. But yeah, a very good fighter. And he's one of these fighters, Scrap, like Panama Joe, we've discussed before, Panama Joe Gans and Harry Smith and Larry Estridge. They never get credited, but they were world champions. They held the coloured titles, which to me are just as valid as the world titles. And they should get more credit for the titles they held. Because if Larry Estridge had held the world middleweight title, it'd be spoke of more. Because he held the coloured middleweight title, it somehow downplays him, but it shouldn't. Okay, he should get the shout out for being the good thinking fighter he was and the great fighters he fought or beat. I do find that period with the coloured titles does get downplayed too much, which is why I've always said on my channel they will be shouted out as much as any world champion for the established lineal title, because they deserve nothing less.
Oh, I agree 100%. And, it's amazing. He told me about the match with Paul Berlenbach when he was stopped. And he told me that really devastated him, because during that time, there were certain rules you had to play by. And he had to move up in weight in order to take on Paul Berlenbach. He was chosen. He didn't choose Paul Berlenbach. He was chosen. And he didn't have any say-so in that match. And he was just telling me about how the corruption was. But he respected the game. He never talked bad about the game, but he told it what it was. And like I said, he was the kind of guy who really understood the history of boxing, and it was a pleasure speaking with him. But yeah, he was a very, very good fighter. He was a southpaw. And like you said, he was very technical. And he reminded a lot of people, like I said, of Marvin Hagler. They called him the Black Stanley Ketchum. And he picked off a lot of punches, as you said, BL. Parried a lot of punches. He would counter, shift his feet. Very, very good fighter he was Larry Estridge.
Yeah, well said, Scrap. And like to all the listeners and to my fellow co-panelists, I promise next time we're on it, we'll be talking a lot more. I'm just trying to keep it short and sweet. But yeah, all of these fighters, the fighters that Scrap shouted out, Panama Joe Ganson, now Larry Estridge, I don't know who his third one is, but yeah, very well deserving to be spoken of and highlighted.
Absolutely. So I think we're back to you, BL, for your number 3. Is that it? Your third one?
Yes, my third one. Now, I made a change. I know I was going to do young Peter Jackson at first, okay, because I love to rant and rave about young Peter Jackson. But I thought to myself, it's my third one and my throat might not hold up, so I'll pick someone else this time. But definitely, I'll get back to young Peter Jackson, because when I talk about him, I like to have a good rant, and I like why the hell he's not more highly rated by people. Considering he has stoppage wins over Barbados, Walcott, Philadelphia, Jack O'Brien, Sam Langford, amongst others. I once commented on a live where there was someone mentioned in chat, not the people on the live, they mentioned Jimmy Wells' knockout record, and I actually left a comment saying, the names he knocked out can't even compare to the names young Peter Jackson knocked out or stopped, and yet he's not even talked about as a great puncher, whereas Jimmy Wild, people talk about the knockout run, but young Peter Jackson knocked out or stopped way greater fighters than Jimmy Wild did. Just
Absolutely.
one little point I'll get in there.
He stopped Sam Langford in 1906. He stopped the same Sam Langford that went 15 rounds with Jack Johnson.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The next fight, and that was the last loss Langford had for a long time, for a lot of fights.
So young Peter Jackson, I will get back onto him on another live stream at some point where I can rant and rave about how tough he was and how good he was, and how underrated he is. But for my third one, I thought I'd keep it a bit short, so I've gone instead for Billy Misk. Okay, the heavyweight contender of the late teens into the 1920s. One thing I'd like to point out about Billy Misk, first of all, is he only suffered 13 defeats, okay, in just over 100 fights, considering the opposition that he fought in that time. He beat Tommy Gibbons, and he beat Harry Greb, and he beat Mike O'Dowd, and he beat Jack Dillon, and he beat Battling Levinsky. He also beat another very tough handful, former cuddle light heavyweight champion Lee Anderson. He also beat former light heavyweight title claimant Bob Mohar. When you look at actually who he fought a lot of great fighters, and he fought fight runs against them. He had 5 fights with Jack Dillon. He had 4 fights with Battling Levinsky. He had a 5-fight series with Tommy Gibbons. Misk really didn't win the series against Tommy Gibbons, but Tommy Gibbons were a hell of a fighter himself. One thing about Billy Misk is he was an underrated boxer and an underrated fighter in general. When I'm talking about Billy Misk, I always go back to his final fight. And this I think, little story here highlights what kind of a man he was, because he was fighting a very serious illness in the latter part of his career. And into 1923, he knew the Christmas time was coming up. It's a tragic story. He knew the Christmas time was coming up, so he asked his manager to get him one last payday. So his manager got him a fight with Bill Brennan. Now, this is a Billy Misk who'd been struggling with this illness for a time, and he wasn't himself. But he went in there and destroyed Bill Brennan in 4 rounds in a fantastic display, because he wanted one last payday so that he could enjoy Christmas with his family and have a great Christmas and get everything in the wanted, and have a great Christmas. And sadly, not long into New Year, in January, he did actually lose his life and he passed away. But he made sure he put on that great final display against Bill Brennan, destroyed him in 4 rounds, got the payday, enjoyed his Christmas with his family, and then, like I said, tragically, days into New Year, passed away. A real tragic story of a fighter who beat fighters like Charlie Weiner, who was a very tough, capable contender who, like I said, fought and beat fighters like Battling Levinsky, beat other heavyweight contenders like Jack Reno, beat former light heavyweight contenders like Martin Burke. When you add that to all the other fighters he fought and beat, he did fight and lose to Kid Norfolk, for example, as well. Kid Norfolk is one of the most toughest and biggest handfuls you could fight around that time. So to me, Billy Misk is a fighter who has a great resume. Okay, he beat 5 Hall of Famers. He fought some of the greatest fighters of his era, fought across light heavyweight and heavyweight, had a great career. And to cap it off, that tragic story of how he lost his life, but securing his family, that lost great. That story always touches me, because he were fighting this illness that at some point were going to cost him his life. And in those last months, he prioritized getting that money so he could enjoy his last Christmas with his family. Tragic story, but a great fighter who mixed in great company. If you can beat fighters like Harry Greb, Mike O'Dowd, Jack Dillon, Battling Levinsky, you're already a great fighter, and he proved in his career that he was a match for almost anyone. What a great fighter he was, Billy Misk.
Fantastic shout out. Absolutely. Goes very underrated.
When I do get onto young Peter Jackson on a future live stream, I've no doubts we'll announce what the next live stream is going to be at the end of this. It's Scrap's idea. But I'm sure when we'll get to a live stream at some point where I can rant and rave about young Peter Jackson. And I'm looking forward to doing that at some point in the future.
Yeah, Scrap, did you want to add anything about Billy Misk?
Sure, BL, he did a wonderful job. I know he's It's difficult for him to speak, but he got so much in, and he did an outstanding job explaining the horrific story of Billy Misk. With that last year of fighting was really remarkable. See, with Billy Misk, and he was out of St. Paul, Minnesota, along with Michael Dowd and the Gibbons brothers. He was a guy who he wanted to make sure he stamped his name in a legacy because he had so many great fighters out of St. Paul during that time. But what was really touching about that story with the Bright disease was his manager, Jack Redding, at that time, because that was his second manager. He pled with him not to take that fight. He didn't want him to take the fight because they knew at that point in time what his disease was. And he fought Jack Dempsey, and Jack Dempsey has stamped a glove-shaped print on his chest. And by the time he removed that glove from his chest, the entire shape of that glove was on his chest, bright red. And you could see he was feeling a little shook. They said that he hesitated. So at that time, he was really suffering bad before he retired. BL, did he actually retire? Or he said that was his last fight with Brennan. Do you think he would have fought again had he not had that death? Or he just said that was his last fight? Because, yes, he wanted to fight that last fight for his family to have a good Christmas, but that was a dangerous fight with Bill Brennan. So I'm curious to know, do you think he might have fought again after that, or that was just going to be his last fight?
It's a good question, Scrap. From what I was reading in the articles around the time and around after his tragic passing, Bill Brennan kind of knew it was going to be his last fight. But what I read in one newspaper article at time with his manager after he passed away is he was questioned about the Bill Brennan fight, and actually Billy Misk said he didn't want a pushover. He wanted a good fight for his last fight.
Yes, he did say that. Yes. Very interesting. I mean, you're talking about battling Levinsky and Tommy Gibbons, Kid Norfolk, Harry Greb, Gumbo Smith. I mean, are you see this is what I'm talking about. When you line up the list of men that the fighters from the late 1800s going all the way up to the 60s and 70s, the list of men during that time and how often and close together these matches were and how they had to travel in between matches. It's absolutely amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So Billy Misk is a man who doesn't get as much credit unless we bring him up or some others on Facebook will bring him up. And it's a shame because you're talking about a fighter here who would put everything on the line, and he literally did. And that last fight with Bennett. So great breakdown, BL, and he was a fantastic fighter, was Billy Misk. Yes, he was.
Can I just add one other quick point on Billy Misk, because it's just to again highlight, over those last few years he fought, when you look at the fighters he fought from 1921 until the end of his career, who held titles or were in Hall or were rated opponents, even though he was ill, his winning record is incredible. He beat Lee Anderson 1921. He beat heavyweight contender Jack Reno 1921. 1922 he beat Charlie Wynart. He beat Jack Reno. He beat Martin Burke. He beat Martin Burke again. He won on DQ to Tommy Gibbons. And then he lost to Tommy Gibbons towards end of 1922. Now, all those fighters there, even though he was ill, he only lost one of those fights to Tommy Gibbons near the end when he'd already beaten him in that run. So even though he was unwell, he was still beating top-level contenders or top-level fighters. And another thing about him as well, he could punch more than what people think. Because when people look at his career and see he has 32 KOs from 70-odd wins, but what you got to understand is he fought a lot tough opposition. He also stopped fighters later in his career, like Willie Meehan and Fred Fulton, both in one round. Yes, he'd fought Willie Meehan before. Yes, he'd fought Fred Fulton before. But, earlier than that, in 1918, he also stopped fireman Jim Flynn in 2 rounds. So he could also really punch when he wanted to as well.
Yes, he could. And what was amazing, Tommy Gibbons he lost less than 6 fights, BL. Over 100 fights, he lost less than 6 fights, 4 to 5 fights. And Billy Miss was amongst those who had defeated him. I mean, this is incredible. So again, you have to look at these fighters for what they were, who they were, and what time they came, because it's remarkable of the work they have done with the equipment they had during their time. Phenomenal fighter once again was Billy Misk.
Yeah, I will add to Scrap's great point there, actually. It's a very good point because Billy Misk, Tommy Gibbons, like Scrap said, only lost a few times in just over 100 fights. The only other fighters to beat Tommy Gibbons in his professional career were Gene Tunney, Jack Dempsey, Harry Greb. Okay, and then he lost to Billy Misk as well.
Yes.
So,
yes.
When you only lose to Harry Greb, Jack Dempsey, Gene Tunney, and Billy Misk, I mean, it shows what a good caliber of fighter you are when you only lose to those great fighters like Tunney, Dempsey, Greb, aside from Misk. So Misk is in that small number. It's a great point Scrap made. He's one of the few fighters who managed to defeat Tommy Gibbons.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah, that's a heavy duty career right there and a great era. Such a rich era. So I'm struggling internally about who to highlight, but I think I'll go ahead and do it. I'd like to have more slides uploaded for this. It ended up being nice outside, so I can actually sit out here where I have a good signal instead of inside where I have a terrible one. So I didn't upload enough as many slides, but I'm going to go with Philadelphia's loop-the-loop puncher, Dave Hawley, who probably should be in the Hall of Fame. He fought a very busy schedule. He kicked off the century January 1st, 1900 in Philly, one of the many Philly clubs. And he got his groove on, right? He built up experience amid a scene in Philly where lots of people built up very quick experience. So he had a lot of fights. I don't have all of his seasons. I think I just have one of his early seasons. Let me take a look here. Here's Hawley. That's his 1903 season.
Wow.
You know, in 1902, like by 1902, he was on fire, right? He's doing really well. Yeah, like rivalries like Vernon Campbell and some other guys who were fighting busily in that scene. Danny Dwayne gave him trouble, got the best of him in no decision bouts, like newspaper decisions twice. He fought Joe Gans in, let's see, the first one I think was in 1902, his first fight against Gans. Let me pull this up. Hold on a second. Yeah, so Gans got the best of him. They fought in October of 1902. Gans was 124 wins, 7 losses, and 15 draws at that point in his career. And he was the man. And,
Damn, I answered you then random and confirmed it was, but I were on mute. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay, great, thanks. Yeah, and so after Gans gets the best of him in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And then in his next fight, Danny Dwayne, who, like I said, gave him trouble, he beats him, 2 weeks later, and then beats him again in December. So it beats him at the end of October and then again in December. Danny Dwayne beat Sam Langford in 1903. He gave Sam Langford his only loss of 1903, and that was a year that Langford beat Joe Gans. They had like Joe Gans, Jack Blackburn, Sam Langford, Dave Hawley, had a lot of interactions between all of them. You could make a Four Kings argument for those guys at lightweight. They just they didn't all stay at lightweight. Langford was only prominent at lightweight for 1 year. And then in 1904, he moved up to welter. Hawley moved up to welter, but also was able to still make lightweight, which was 133 at the time. Though sometimes titles could be contested at a higher weight by pre-agreement. So when Langford beat Gans, they were supposed to be 138 ringside. So instead of 133, like afternoon weigh-in, they just weighed in ringside 138. But Langford was 140, so he didn't get the title, but he did beat Gans. And he got a lot of praise for that. He was considered an unknown internationally until he beat Gans, because he didn't have that many prominent opponents. Patsy Sweeney, who he'd stopped a little bit before that fight, that was really the one that sort of sealed the booking. But when they finally, there was talk of a fight with Langford and Gans anyway. But my point is, Hawley fought Gans multiple times. He fought Langford. He gave Langford his only loss of 1904. He also gave Jack Blackburn his first loss. The first time they fought, I think, was in May of 03, and they drew. But then the next time they fought, I believe, let me check. Yeah, well, I'll get to that. So, okay, so by September 1903, he has this wonderful run, right? Draws and wins, but then it culminates in like he beats Spike
The
Sullivan.
last fought in 1906, buddy.
Okay, great. So this is like September 1903. Holly beats Spike Sullivan, then he beats Young Star, then he stops Young Star, and then he stops Sam Bolin. Those are good wins, and then he fights Gans again. This is another no decision. This time they draw, newspaper decision draw. Let's see, the Philly item and the record had it for Gans. No, hold on a second. No, I'm sorry. A draw from the Philly item and the Philly record, and the Boston Journal gave it to Gans. Gans had the better of the bout on points, but his margin was so slight that many spectators thought he was bested. So it was a close fight either way. So Holly's a legit guy. In the next fight, he gives Blackburn his first loss. Then he gets a rematch, Gans. So he gets the best over Blackburn, who had gotten the best of Joe Gans. And actually later in the year, Blackburn would get the best of Sam Langford in a prearranged draw. Right after Langford had beaten Gans on points. So like there was a wonderful texture of lightweight. And a lot of these guys moved up to welter the next year. So we got crazy up at welter. Langford moved up to welter on his way to middle the year after. Blackburn was fighting at welter. So like one of the fights they had the next year was contested at 141. I think 142 is the acknowledged lightweight. I mean, the welter limit at the time, but I think they were both 141 for one of their fights. So they were fighting at welter as well. But this is the lightweight. Holly was, I think, like Langford was growing, but Holly was still able to make lightweight. So he wanted the title shot. These no decision bouts, stopping Joe Gans within 6 rounds, this ain't happening. So, but he did get to fight him and gave a good account of himself. And December 7th, 1903, he's booked against Gans again in Philly. This is the Washington Social Club. They have a good fight. Gans clearly wins it, but they have a good fight. The very next day is when Gans goes and fights Sam Langford in Boston and loses on points over 15 rounds. These guys were crazy. So then Holly, I think the next fight after this most recent Gans newspaper decision loss, I think might be his Boston debut at the Central AC, against Belfield Walcott, Barbados Walcott's brother, who was a lightweight rather than Barbados Walcott's welter. Then he stops Timmy Kearns. Oh my goodness. So Holly's on he can't beat Gans, but he's gave Blackburn his first L. He's about to give Langford only his second career loss. A really good account of himself. But so he stops Timmy Kearns, has some more, gets the best of Steve Crosby in a no decision, fights the human punching bag Joe Grimm, who has a crazy strength of schedule, but he was just famous for lasting in the distance. He's the type of guy you can beat him, but you got to try and stop him. Joe Grimm was a wild dude. But then the fight after Joe Grimm, so in the newspaper, Joe Grimm wanted to fight Langford, but they were laughing about it, saying he's not going to beat Holly and he's not going to get a chance. He should go fight some, lower tier fighter. But Holly gets the best of Grimm. He then fights Langford. He comes to Boston. This is in April. Comes to Boston and beats Langford. It's considered an upset, even though Holly's very good. Holly's breaking out all the tricks. He's fighting out of the crouch, and now he's like sort of using swimming movements and throwing punches from weird angles from below, and the loop punch, and using like basically shoulder roll techniques. Keep the one shoulder up, keep the chin tucked, and so you can move that way. You can deflect things. He's doing all kinds of stuff, and he bewilders Langford. And this is only like about 4 months after Langford had beaten Joe Gans, who'd beaten Holly. So again, styles make fights. They're going to have some more fights, and Langford's not going to win all of the other fights. But this was Holly's best showing against Langford. They had one of the other ones was an excellent fight, but this was where he got the best, and it was. Hold on, I got a graphic somewhere here for it. While I look for it, there's Holly. Oh no, there's Langford and Blackburn. But let me look for my Dave Holly thing here. Yeah, here we go. Boom, that's the Boston newspaper. People talk about like the media and hometown cooking. At this time the press was really harsh. So like Langford beats Gans, right? He beats the absolute unit at lightweight on the planet Earth. And then shortly after that, he gets a prearranged draw with Jack Blackburn. Blackburn gets the best, and they're like, Blackburn, his master. Like they pull no punches just because Blackburn's out of Philly and Langford's out of Cambridge and fighting out of Boston, but living in Cambridge, adjacent to Boston. They don't pull punches. They've severely questioned his potential. For, it's like they said he got a dent in his sort of like there are now questions. And then of course Blackburn's campaigning on having beaten him. Danny, like in spirit, Danny Dwayne, who I mentioned, he's campaigning on having gotten the best of Blackburn. Or I think that might have been controversial. I think Blackburn might have claimed a low blow. I can't remember. But Dwayne also gave Langford his only 1903 loss. So like lightweight is on fire. Some of these guys are going to, as with Holly, going up to welter. So Holly is considered one of the top welters. He was one of the top lightweights, very busy. So he's going, let's see, he does lose to, so after Graham, so he beats Langford, he gets some more wins or draws, then he fights Gans again, he fights even this time. By this point, this is June 1904, Joe Gans has 146 wins, counting newspaper decisions, against only 9 losses with 17 draws. Absolutely incredible. One of the absolute greatest fighters, especially at lightweight of all time. Top 2 at lightweight, with the great Benny Leonard, I would say. I mean, it's a pretty good argument. What do you think, guys? For Gans, top 2 lightweight of all time?
Definitely.
I personally have him 1. I know BL has him 2. Either way, whichever way you go, he's definitely the top 2 greatest lightweight, in my opinion. Definitely.
Yeah, I agree with Scrap.
And a serious guy at welter as well. And sometimes, like he kept a busy schedule. He fought in private, fought for side bets, did all kinds of stuff. He also had big fights with, later with training camps and big fights like the battling Nelson and especially, so Gans was extra special, right? So not being able to beat him so even fighting even with him or giving him a good account of yourself against Gans is serious. And Holly was dead serious. He gets a newspaper decision over, sorry, go ahead.
No, if I could, I can't remember if I'm mistaken on this, but I could be wrong. I could be misthinking, but I'm sure also he wasn't stopped for the first time until after he'd had 124 fights. He was never stopped, Dave Holly. He was a very tough fighter. Not only was he versatile, like you pointed out against Langford, but if I remember correctly, I don't think he was ever stopped until a guy called Sailor Burke beat him in 1907. And that was after he'd had over 120 fights, fighting all those great names he fought. He was never stopped in all that time. I'm sure I'm right on that. I could be mistaken, but he was very tough as well.
Yeah, so at one point I think it was in 05. It's either 05 or 06. Yeah, they said he had cracked his skull. I didn't see any follow up on it, but in a fight, he had a head collision in a fight. But he was, so I'm not sure which fight that was, but he might have actually finished that fight. But yeah, he had like a DQ, I guess, against Fred Douglas in 1904, but that's not being stopped in the sense of like, did you get stopped? That's the ref stopped it. Yeah, Holly was crazy. He fought not only Jack Blackburn, he fought Jack's brother, Fred Blackburn. At least, it might be multiples, but they definitely fought in 1906, January 1906. Fred was 20-3 with 4 draws at the time. Per box track.
I think he fought him in 1903 as well, I think.
Oh, yeah, he may well have. But who did I not mention? Oh, he fought Roof Turner. He beat him in a newspaper decision, but I feel like he also stopped him in a fight. Maybe I just haven't gotten to that point yet. Yeah, he knocked him out. He lost a newspaper decision to Kid Wilson in May of 1906, but then in June 1906, he stops Roof Turner. I'm not sure how long it took him. Hold on.
20 rounds, I think, wasn't it? 20th round.
Turner was floored twice in the 9th round, so I'm not sure when it was stopped, but he definitely was.
I'm sure it was 20th round. Could be wrong.
Okay. Roof Turner is a very serious fighter.
He also fought and beat another very serious guy, someone who Scrap will be well aware of, a really tough lightweight contender called Steve Crosby. He not only fought him a number of times, he also beat Steve Crosby at one point in, I think, 2 rounds or 3 rounds. But yeah, that's
very good fighter.
Thing about Holly is it wasn't only the major fighters; those are the fighters like you mentioned: Roof Turner, Steve Crosby, Sam Boland, George Cole. He fought all the tough fighters around that as well.
George
that often fighters from this era don't get credit for. People just go to the Hall of Famers, but he fought a lot and beat a lot of other good names as well. Sorry, random. I don't mean to stick in.
Not at all. This is fantastic. You just fire away. Yeah, I see the Sailor Burke, the TKO. And Jeff Clark stopped him in early 1910.
But I'm sure he was never, if I remember correctly, he was never stopped until Sailor Burke stopped him. It took over 120 fights before someone finally stopped him. And fighting that opposition, Langford, Dixie Kids, Walcotts, Blackburns, Gansers, you know, and all the other tough fighters he fought, that is quite incredible. Shows how tough he was.
Absolutely. Just an incredible pace of his career. He didn't have, like, the busy part of his career wasn't very long in seasons, not like a Langford type thing, but man, he had a lot. I think it was 131 fights in the BoxRec database. Who knows if there are more, but he was a busy character. And, you know, he did get a title shot against Joe Gans, but it wasn't until 1906. And they weighed in at 135 pounds at 6 p.m. Holly was down twice in the 12th, apparently. Gans was 133.5 for the fight. And that was in, yeah, so that was like mid 1906. He did get a title shot. He then fought Blackburn again. Then he fought George Gunther, the Melbourne Kangaroo George Gunther. George Gunther's a guy I might have to bring up. He didn't have like a ton of success once he got to the States, but he sure fought some dudes. I was looking at him. George Gunther's probably deserves a shout out.
Guys, I want to leave for one moment. I'll be right back. About
Yes, sir.
20 seconds. I'll be right back.
Alrighty. But yeah, like you said, BL, like Sam Bolin. I feel like it's Sam. Was it Sam Bolin I found the picture for the box? Oh, no, it was Steve Crosby. Found a really grungy old newspaper clipping photo for the BoxRec database. That was cool. But yeah, Holly was a serious dude. And given 1904 Sam Langford a loss, a year when Sam Langford absolutely ripped apart George Elbows McFadden, he knocked him cold for 2 minutes. He destroyed Tommy Sullivan. They were supposed to fight earlier in the year. Sullivan pulled out, and then they did fight later in the year. And Blackburn, they threw in the sponge in the third, and he was undefeated. But I think he's out of Lawrence, Massachusetts. But yeah, he got really destroyed. This is the year Langford got the best on points, but Walcott's late fight rally, the aggression in the late fight, that particular ref said it balanced out, so they called it a draw, even though he wasn't just counting rounds to assign the winner. Walcott gave Langford hell in the last several rounds, so it balanced out and fought a draw. But like, this is the year that Holly confounds Langford, when Walcott was actually, until he got fiery at the end, and Langford said he kind of mouthed off to him because Walcott had been talking trash. And I think maybe at the end of the fight, he wouldn't even shake hands. But yeah, Walcott's a pretty fiery fellow. Oh, Scrapbook's back. Hold on. Yeah, so to give trouble to 1904 Sam Langford, when he started, like, who else did Langford stop? He stopped Joe Reed, the New York Joe Reed, in I think the 9th round. Langford was on fire. He had 14 fights. He had a couple that were canceled. I think he was supposed to fight Charlie O'Rourke, maybe, and he was supposed to fight, let me think, Kid Thomas, maybe, of New York, someone, Hugh McWinters or Huey Winters. He was supposed to fight. But the police cracked down in early 04. The police cracked down on the Boston club scene for a little while there. And Langford, it cost Langford some bookings. So the second time he fought Belfield Walcott, the police were there. That's why it's a no decision bout. They didn't render a decision. It was a mild affair because the cops were there. And this was at a time when it was controversial. Like, is it a sporting athletic endeavor, or is it prize fighting? And the newspaper, one of the writers in the newspaper, had been sort of lamenting he didn't like the New York fighters coming in with side bets and things like that, and it being so open, because he's saying, like, to the state authorities in Massachusetts, it's kind of confirming that it's prize fighting first. So anyway, they had the crackdown, and it did affect Langford's schedule. But so I think Holly came to Cambridge, adjacent to the city of Boston, to beat Langford. Langford's hometown, his adopted hometown. He was from Nova Scotia, but that's where he was living. And yeah, so Holly was a serious dude, fought some serious dudes, fought a ridiculously busy schedule, extremely clever, adaptable fighter. Didn't get opportunity, and he was cursed by fighting in a time, as far as his memory, because if you go to the BoxRec the top of the page for his BoxRec profile. It says 34 wins, 9 losses, 1 draw, 30 KOs. He was stopped 4 times in his career. You're like, okay, what's the big deal? But if you go down and count the newspaper decisions, he had 131 bouts. Granted, a lot of those were 6-round bouts. That's still, a 6-round bout is a specialty. And a lot in Philly, that come forward, aggressive Philly style. Well, in its arguably its richest period, you only had 6 rounds. And so getting a stoppage is, you get a win-win. Otherwise, it's a no decision. Newspapers are pretty harsh on you, even if you're a hometown guy, because a lot of the prominent fighters in the Philly scene were all hometown guys. So it's not like they're just outsiders coming in. People would go in. Langford made his Philly debut in 1904 against Holly. He also made his Baltimore, Maryland debut against Holly in 1904. That was a longer bout. That was 15 rounds. I feel like, oh, sorry, scooters are going by. Sorry, I'm near the park, but I'm in the city, so they're just having a little joyride there. So anyway, yeah, so Holly, here's Langford's 1904. This might be an old graphic. I hope this is not one with a typo. Bill Lewis. Oh, that's Willie Lewis, right? He ripped apart Willie Lewis, although Langford had a size advantage. I had it as Bill Lewis. This is an old graphic. But anyway, Holly's the guy who gets the best of him. So it's pretty crazy. That's an elite win. That's a Hall of Fame win. 1904 Sam Langford was terrifying. That wasn't Holly's only accomplishment as far as good fighters that he beat. Spike Sullivan, Young Star, Sam Bowen, Jack Blackburn, Walcott in one of the bouts. These are serious people who fought busy schedules themselves. So he was in that scene. I love this time period. Because look at this same year. Look at all those fights he had. And there's Langford. He's like, what? He had at least 28. And that's a typo. I think that February is actually February 24th, Tuesday night. The Young Jarvis fight that I found. I think this is an old graphic. I didn't have space on my other brands for the slides I made, so I had to go into an old thing. So anyway, yeah. So Holly's dead serious. Blackburn, Gans, these guys are super intense. Oh yeah. So I think BL's. I think his voice is cashed out. It's been awesome. BL, feel free to add something, but if you just listen, that's perfectly fine. Where's my 4 Kings picture? There it is. Blackburn on the left, then Langford, then Holly, then the great Joe Gans. Look at those beasts, and it's such a rich time for lightweight. 1903 was an absolutely crazy year for the lightweights. It's a great division. It was already a very rich division. It's scrap better than anybody. These guys were amazing fighters. Blackburn, the defensive genius, and he was like a very rangy fighter. Langford, who wasn't tall but had the long arms. Very clever, excellent lead hand, but lots of power early in his career that would then become crazy later. Holly, adaptable, tricky, great crouching fighter, but also like shoulder rolling, loop-to-loop punching, just a really difficult proposition. And then Joe Gans, the one and only.
You also have to add Steve Crosby, and you also had Bobby Dobbs. There was a guy by the name of Kid Lewis. You had a lot of young black fighters who were in the lightweight division during that time. And
Vernon Campbell, yeah.
Yeah, 1904 was an outstanding year for those fighters combined. I mean, Joe Gans was fighting this young man that we're talking about in 1904, and that's next day he had to go over to Boston to fight Sam Langford. So Dave Holly was the kind of fighter who, he was a catch and shoot and an overhand. That was the loopy-loop. Beautiful shoulder roll. He would catch the punch. He would parry it off, and then he would overhand in the same motion. And he got bit by a dog. That's how he died, German Shepherd. But he got an infection. But he was a very, very strong, two-fisted puncher, moved from side to side, quick on his feet. Very, very accurate puncher as well. And he was in there with all of them. I mean, his record is phenomenal. You guys just mentioned it. Great fighter was Dave Holly. Not in the Hall of Fame as far as I know. Amazing fighter.
Yeah, he's not in the Hall. He was nominated this year. I was cheering for him. They ended up going with someone else, but I think it's the no decision thing. And if for people who get into this is recent for me, recent years, I should say, getting into the nitty gritty of what is a newspaper decision, how is it scored, what was the stance, how oppositional were the press with regards to fighter performances, hometown versus away fighters, and I gotta say, standards were high. Standards were high. Dave Hawley was an excellent fighter. He was in an amazing scene. And Philadelphia Jack O'Brien was probably the king of the 6-rounders, but Dave Hawley was right up there. Philadelphia Jack O'Brien was just a machine of 6-round excellence, but he wasn't the only one. Dave Hawley, I think, pretty sure Vernon Campbell, Steve Crosby, Jack Blackburn, Sam Langford. Well, Sam Langford didn't have as many 6-round fights. Langford graduated to longer bookings pretty early in his early seasons. But yeah, early in 1903, he had plenty of 6-round bookings. They didn't all make it 6 rounds, but yeah, Hawley's just a really special fighter. But he's a guy who's in the shadow of all-time greats, and also some other greats who don't get their credit, like Blackburn, who's known as a trainer, an excellent trainer, including Joe Louis, but not limited to Joe Louis. So I'm pretty sure one of his fighters became champ in the 20s. If I'm not mistaken, was it 26? Gosh, I can't remember which one it was. But anyway, Blackburn's one of Blackburn's pupils.
Well, yeah, Samuel Mendel, he said in the 20s.
26 maybe, and then Lewis got it in 37. And that combination that the great Joe Louis used to win the world title is one of my favorites of all time. Just Joe, he punches the guy's arm out of the way, the lead hand, and he's doing like a pushy thing, punches his arm out of the way, and then
you're talking about,
and then hits him with everything of the right hand, a missile of a right hand right through the middle, and he brings his back foot up, so he's doing like the fulcrum point style punching, and then gives him the nudge with the shoulder, and then gets ready to push him off, but the guy's already falling. Incredible. But that's some Jack Blackburn old school excellence. Joe Louis, in some ways, was like a throwback fighter. You can correct me if I'm mistaken here, Scrap, but like he was trained to incorporate a lot of the elements of the old school, and then Blackburn's idea of improving it. But he knew all the old tricks, and that trick he used is punching the arm out of the way and then send a missile through the gap. That was absolute genius, and that's Jack Blackburn for you, who basically started training Louis after his success as an amateur. So anyway, Scrap, you have one more to go. I think I've done some small justice to Dave Hawley. I definitely wanted to give him a shout. Feel free to just take it away. It's actually just started raining here, so I'm going to shut my screen off and wipe the phone off, but just go ahead. It won't end the live stream. Do your thing, brother. Oh, Scrap got booted out. Oh, that's right, BL. Yeah, in the chat here. Yeah, they did go with Furpo. And that's, compared to Dave Hawley, come on now. Gave Blackburn his first loss. Gave Langford one of only 2 losses across 2 busy-ass seasons. I mean, Langford had 28 fights in 1903, lost one of them, had 14 fights in 1904 that actually went through, lost only one of them to Dave Hawley. That win means more than anything Furpo did, in my opinion. Just that one win. Hollywood, that wasn't his only thing. But yeah, powerful fighter. I don't know if Scrap had to go or if he got booted. I know he said he was having a little throat issue. Oh, I believe he's back. He's back. Let me just let it load. Hopefully before the rain hits the wrong part of this screen.
Yeah,
Here we go.
I'm back, BL.
Okay, go ahead and do your thing, Scrap.
You were talking before I jumped off. You were talking about the Jimmy Braddock and Joe Louis fight. How Joe Louis had threw the left hook, knocked out Jimmy Braddock's left hand out of the way. And that was a beautiful, beautiful sequence. He was taught that by, believe it or not, Holman Williams. See, Holman Williams and Jack Blackburn used to do business together. And Holman Williams had schooled Joe Louis as he was coming up in the amateurs, and he taught him a lot of combinations. And he taught him how to time that punch. That was not an accident. Just get the hand out of the way and drop the right hand down the pipe. And that was a beautiful, beautiful combination. That's what won the world title. But yeah, that was phenomenal.
That's one of my favorite combinations of all time. It's poetry in motion, and it was a hell of a punch. It took the guy a moment to realize he needed to have it lie down. That was a serious shot.
Absolutely. And we talked about Dave Holly. Dave Holly was famous, obviously it's a different way, but he was the guy who actually came across with that catch and shoot, where you would block the hand with the same hand, drop it down the middle. In his case, he kind of threw an overhand. But yeah, those are moves that have to be calculated correctly because you could be countered. But if you calculate it correctly, man would never think you're going to throw a punch at that time. So that was a well-executed punch and it won him the world title, and it couldn't come at a more prestige moment.
Yeah, it was absolute a beauty of a shot. I mean, he has so many examples of great combination punching and staggered timing, you know, hitting on the half beat, stuff that Archie Moore would use to great effect in his career as well. But yeah, I mean, Joe Louis was something else. But like Blackburn came up and fought. He was a very experienced fighter. He had a lot of fights on the record, and he claimed to have way more, a couple hundred more than we're aware of. So, because, you know, at times, like, people would fight in private, didn't always make the papers. It wasn't always to someone's advantage, to the patron's advantage, for people to know they were hosting a fight. Even if it was legal, it wasn't always publicized. Although I do sometimes, like Larry Temple, we mentioned, one of the fights I found for him early in his career was in a barn with some millionaires and a sports team owner, and I forget who the other guy was, some sort of mogul and some sort of thing. And then it's like millionaires, and they're in like a horse stable. They have one chair, so I think they flipped a coin or drew lots or something to see who got the chair.
Who was this?
Larry Temple.
Larry Temple.
I'm going to do a show on him. I'm researching his career now to help with my Langford studies. Yeah, it was in a barn. I think it was in Chicago?
I believe.
Or New York. Yeah, but it was like one that wasn't in any of the database. I was like, that's interesting. This was like when he was first coming out. So he was like going from training partner to active fighter, at least like on the record for us today. But, you know, Larry Temple training with, imagine training with Dixon and Walcott, or young Peter Jackson training with the great Joe Gans. He's seconding, you know, he's his corner and his main training partner. I mean, talk about access to legends. Or, you know, Jimmy Walsh and Sam Langford training together. Even though dramatically different sized people, even early in Langford's career, Walsh was much smaller, but like they could spar. You know, Langford was very nimble until much later in his career. He was very nimble, so he could keep up. He was extremely fast for his size. And, you know, he knew how to Langford knew how to pull his punches for different reasons. You know what I mean, Scrap? Whether he had to keep hay in the barn and just carry guys so they could get a good fight, a good person in the next city, or because he was like sparring someone of a different size and he was checking his power. Langford was clever like that. But Blackburn, yeah, man, he had all the skills, and that's what happened with Joe Louis. He was like a powerful amateur, lots of power, but Blackburn started teaching him all this stuff, and yeah, winning that title like that with that combination, it's just poetry in motion. I'm glad I got to even mention it. It's just absolutely beautiful technique. And I feel like the heavyweights, like the lightweights and lower weights, including Blackburn, but also guys like Holly and Langford, they brought some of the trickier stuff up the weights. So then later you get like Ketchell's left shift, and you get like the Dempsey roll and all this stuff. And I even saw they were talking about Langford's the loop punch. This was much later. This is an English newspaper talking about referencing Langford's loop punch. So they, you know, which he would have gotten from losing to Dave Holly and then having those fights with him. So all these guys, these are like brilliant fighters, and you know, Blackburn was a brilliant trainer as well, and he demanded the discipline. Like he wasn't playing, man. He was a serious guy. He was a dead serious dude in real life, and it was a real stormy thing. Like you know, the trouble he got in wasn't long after he got out of the hospital. It wasn't long after he got out of the hospital for getting slashed by his brother Fred down the face in an argument.
Yes.
Fred went on the run, and then Blackburn got out of the hospital. It wasn't that long after that he was shooting people, and then had a trial, and then, you know, had to go to prison. But he came back. He was still really good. He wasn't the same, but he was still tough as nails and brilliant. He just didn't have the same physical, that lean fighter's body.
Yeah, you know what happened to him, Random? When him and his common law wife, they were having a good time with another couple. And it just so happened where they got into a heated argument. And Blackburn, like you said, he had a temper on him. And they got into a little bit of a scuffle. So Blackburn and his wife left. But Blackburn couldn't leave it alone. He kept thinking about it, so he went back on his own. And he had his wife started following him. So he had his wife go to the front door to knock on the door, just as a disguise. She opened the door. So when she opened the door, Blackburn punched the man in the face. So he was hiding in the bushes when she had knocked on the door. And when she knocked on the door and he came out, and this is when he punched him in the face. And then he pulled out a gun. He had a revolver. I'm not sure if it was a revolver at that time, but he had one of those 2-shooters. And at that time, he shot the man. And when he shot the man went down and they ran. He didn't know if he killed the man or not. He came back because he realized he left his gun there. When he came back, it was a black cop, who was there waiting for him. And that's why he wound up going to the penitentiary. He got out because he promised the judge that he would teach his son how to box. And that's how he got out. He did 6.5 years. But when he got out, he became a trainer. And he was one of the best trainers in boxing history. He had the Lou Ambers and the Mendells and so many of them, Bud Taylor, great trainer. So he's in the Hall of Fame as a trainer, but not as a fighter. And I don't understand that. But
he's due that credit eventually at some point. They got to go with it. And I think, he's one of the great trainers, and he's one of the main, guys who brought the old school into the Joe Louis era. Through into the Joe Louis era, and then the popularity of Joe Louis and that style, that's a variation of Blackburn's style. It's just Joe Louis had different attributes than Blackburn. Blackburn was lean. He was long and lean and tall for his weight class. And so like a lot of his fights, he'd have like a 3-inch reach advantage. And he knew how to use it. Blackburn was a clever fella. But Joe Louis was like, he poured that information and just his brilliance expressed itself most completely in the person of Joe Louis, who was already a dangerous amateur. But he added stuff. So but he had the experience because he'd been in there with some of the great fighters of all time. Especially Sam
Langford 6 times, Random. 6 times Sam Langford. That's amazing.
Right. And even though, and like win-loss draw is one thing, but that first draw, that prearranged draw, he definitely got the best of the majority of rounds. And the Boston paper was like sang his praises hard, and he campaigned on that. And so was Danny Dwayne, because Danny Dwayne had gotten the best of Blackburn and Langford, and then Langford had gotten the best of Gans, and then Gans had gotten the best of Holly, and they also ended up fighting to a draw. Langford and Gans were supposed to rematch in 1904, but it didn't go through because it got postponed a day because Gans said he wanted to make sure Langford could make the 138 ringside. And then when it looked like it wouldn't, he fought young Kid Griffo instead in a private fight challenge match.
Yeah, another black fighter who a lot of people don't talk about. Yeah, nice lightweight.
Yeah, so these guys are all intertwined, but they're keeping a schedule that enables it. And so this is something not unique to this era, but so you see, some people, they just like to count losses because they like the idea of no one can get the best of this person. But there are practical limits. And when you're talking about a seasoned sport, which is like pretty much how it was functioning for a lot of these fighters at this time, going completely undefeated is notable. It's super notable with a heavy schedule. But even like with Langford only losing once the whole year in 28 fight 1903, and only losing once in a 14 fight 1904. That's a pretty high win-loss percentage. It's harder to go undefeated with a busy schedule. Holly did have some losses. Danny Dwayne gave him a lot of problems, and he was a good fighter. Danny Dwayne was a serious dude, but yeah, so a lot of guys make a claim, but it's just the greatness of Gans and the eventual greatness of Langford overshadows guys like Blackburn and Holly. And so it's absolutely essential that they get a shout out here, as well as on your channel, Scrap, and on BL's and some of the excellent channels that do shout out the old school. So definitely had to get Dave Holly in there. And I think I've just about covered enough Holly ground. I said that like 30 minutes ago and then kept going, but would you like to do one more, Scrap?
Sure, I'll name one more. George Godfrey, the Leaperville Shadow. He was also known as the Black Shadow. His name was Phoebe Smith Williams. And I'll tell you why he's important to historical conversations. But also, there was a point in time in boxing history in the heavyweight division why he was very, very important. I'll share it with you. He stood 6'3", weighed anywhere between 220 to 260 pounds. He was born February 27th, 1896, I believe, Mobile, Alabama. And he died in Los Angeles in 47. Now, he faced the Boston Bone Crusher, Sam Langford, man we were just talking about, 3 times in his first 11 bouts as a professional. I want to explain something to you about that. Between May 20th, 1920 and August 17th of 1921, he had 1 draw, 2 losses, once in Canada and twice in America. I want you to think about what I just said. What was amazing about him, when Harry Wells was disqualified after fighting Jack Sharkey in 1926, they took his colored heavyweight championship title away from him. Had nothing to do with that fight, but they took it away from him. Meanwhile, he was waiting for the Dempsey fight. So when they did that, George Godfrey had fought a young man from Canada. His name was Larry Gans. And when he fought Larry Gans, it was such a buildup. It was an amazing buildup. He had 2 black fighters there, one from Canada and one from Mobile, Alabama. And they fought each other. And George Godfrey would become the colored heavyweight champion. And then Larry Gans would become that champion. But then you had another fighter by the name of Al Walker. Al Walker and Obie Walker. And all of those fighters started mixing it up with one another. But it was because of George Godfrey, I believe, was when the ball started to roll, when black heavyweights started getting these opportunities like that. But I don't know, maybe BL can help me, because I've done tons of research. I still can't get a valid reason why they would strip him from his colored heavyweight championship title when they claim that he did an excessive holding and he hit Jack Sharkey on a break, and then they would take his colored heavyweight championship title. But I couldn't figure out the reason why. I don't know if BL can help me with that.
Did it help push him out of other fights they didn't want to have happen, probably? You know, it's a dirty business.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible.
They tried to unrecognize Joe Gans back in I think it was in 03, you know, and the white lightweight championship came up, and there were certain writers, because
that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Jimmy Britt's family was influential, and his brother was Wallace Britt was like a big time manager and somewhat controversial person.
Yes.
There was a scandal about him paying George Memsick, Jimmy Burns, not protege, but joined champion Tommy Burns' camp, so adopted the name Jimmy Burns, paying him to not fight so that it wouldn't potentially get in the way of Langford's fight. Sorry, a ball just came flying past me at velocity. I'm near the park.
Oh boy.
I'm gonna see if I can climb up and get it for him. Yeah, anyway, yeah, that totally broke my train of thought. Just keep going. I gotta do a little climb here.
Yeah, but in his 42nd fight, he would take on Jack Sharkey. And, you know, again, when you look at these kind of fighters, I mean, he was in there with Larry Gans, Bearcat Wright, trying to think of the top of my head, Fred Fulton. He was in there with Neil Clisby, Long, Thomas, Hawkins, Soldier Jones, Paulino Escudon, Johnny Risco, who was known as the Rubber Band, the Cleveland Baker Boy, Jack Townsend, another fighter who a lot of people don't talk about other than BL and others, Clem Johnson. I'm just randomly at the top of my head, but George Godfrey, I think, is very underrated. And I just wanted to make sure that he got recognized in this conversation. I think he's a very underrated fighter. And he played a very significant role at a very sensitive time in 1926. Because you got to remember, this was the same time that Jack Dempsey had taken on Gene Tunney. They fought in Philadelphia. And then in 27, they fought Soldier Field in Chicago. And Harry Wills, it was getting tense because he was promised the heavyweight championship title fight and it was reneged, and then they canceled Jack Dempsey out of New York in 24. So when George Godfrey became the colored heavyweight champion, they got rid of Harry Wills. Everyone was thrilled about that. No more threat, no more opportunity for him to face Jack Dempsey. But here comes another fight. And they didn't care about that. But the fact that he got the opportunity was significant. And he got it from a fighter because it was vacant at that point from Canada. And it was Larry Gans. So that was it was an amazing time for the community during that era. A lot of people just don't understand how amazing that was and how sensitive that was.
Yeah, and it's such a rich era. So many people fighting awesome schedules, but very little in the way of world titles to go around. So if you get an inactive champ, especially at heavyweight with the latter part of Johnson's and then Willard's, very much Willard's, but then Dempsey's and then Tunney, he didn't do much. Once he was there, he left on top. These inactive champs, especially like the white champions often, but also Johnson. It's, guys have a whole career and just can't get the opportunity because maybe they only have a 3-year peak. I'm not saying specifically Godfrey here, but certain guys, a lot of guys aren't an Archie Moore or Sam Langford who can just stay dangerous for like more than a decade at the highest levels. Like a lot of guys, they come and go. Yeah, and with Wills, I think they just wanted to get him out of the picture, man. There was a lot of money behind Dempsey, a lot of PR. I see in the newspapers the racism in the press. Yeah, it got bad. It was already bad. It got worse when Johnson, unified the colored heavyweight and the white heavyweight title against Tommy Burns 1908. But then it got even worse. Like once Johnson lost to Willard, the whitewash began. And they started sort of like minimizing the legacy of the great colored fighters at heavyweight that had led up to that.
Well,
Some of these writers, it was just such a pity. But the internet affords us the opportunity to learn about this stuff and not correct the record, but fill out the discussion about great fighters of the past and not limit it to the people who had a lot of official backing, even if they were also great, like Dempsey. He was a great fighter, but I don't consider him like the greatest. Or he's like, we did the big countdown, which was so much fun. I had him like 6th in the first quarter century. Which is pretty good at heavyweight, 6th, but it's not, but that's what happens when guys sit out. But some of these other dudes, they didn't have that luxury. So fair or not, they did more. And I'm not saying Godfrey necessarily did more than Dempsey. I would have to look at the actual careers, but there are examples, guys like Langford, who was recognized as champion. He did fight Walcott for the championship, but never got his championship like, his full opportunity was fighting for national titles as much as anything else, Australia and the Commonwealth or the English title. And I'm pretty sure Langford smacking Iron Haig around in 1909 is why they didn't, like he was the last pre-Lonsdale belt heavyweight champion of England.
Well, I'll tell you about that. When you go back to Red Summer in 1910, when Jack Johnson had defeated Jim Jeffries, it caused so much chaos where they didn't want to have mixed race fights anymore. When we take it over to England, I told you about 1806. And when that law came about in 1806, you got to remember, 4 years later is when you had Cribb and Molyneux, because you wouldn't have a mixed race fight before that. So once Molyneux came over from America, he was the first American fighter to fight for a championship, and he fought Tom Cribb. Once that 33rd round happened, it caused so much chaos in England. And you would have the British Boxing Board of Control, when they took over, that's when they decided to cancel out mixed race fights. If you had an ounce of black blood, you could not fight for a title. It was similar to Tex Rickard over in America with 1910 with Jeffries and Johnson. So you had these kinds of problems happen. They would work themselves out over time, but it always took a special event for it to clutter the sport and unclutter the sport. And those are the two parallels of those times.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely. Well, Scrap, it's starting to rain and my phone is dying. So I think that the universe is telling me that the show has to end. Because I'm not sure if I'm not even inside. So if the phone dies and the live stream keeps going, I'm going to have to sprint up. So I think, if you don't mind, I think we'll call it. I can't wait to do the next one. BL was going to announce the next one, but we're going to do, what are we going to do? Top, not necessarily a countdown. We're going to do 5 extremely important seasons for an individual boxer. 5 different single seasons. Was that what you wanted to do, or a countdown?
Well, it would be the greatest and the most influential years, 5 of them in the history of boxing. And as we talk, you'll understand why, how significant that conversation would be.
Ooh, I like that. Do you mean the totality of the year, like all the fights in a given year, calendar year?
Yes.
What a great idea. I didn't realize it was like that. Oh yeah, I'm down for that. You just let me know. We'll message each other. You let me know when you want to do that one. We'll coordinate with BL.
Discuss what so we have an idea of what we're getting into. But I just want to say apologies for coming in the time that I came in, and I want to apologize to BL as well. I've been so busy, 5 different states in like 2 months, because I'm going to all these tournaments. In fact, I have to go to Atlanta, Georgia next month. After my son graduates, he has a big tournament, the AAU Nationals. So I'm just constantly busy, and I just had the opportunity to jump on when I did. So the tardiness, I apologize for it.
No, it's quite all right, because we weren't sure what was happening, so we were just going to do three each, and just, because we have plenty more. All of us have plenty more fighters in mind pre-1940. Oh, my battery is about to literally die. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Scrap. Great having you. We'll talk to everyone soon.
Got it.